Hey guys, welcome to another video for Tarantula Science. In this video we're going to be looking at the general anatomy of the tarantula. And so what I have here is I have a model of the tarantula, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything out so we can reassemble it and put everything back as we explain what everything is. So I've emptied out the cephalothorax and the abdomen, and we essentially have hollow cavities at this point. And so the way I'm going to do this is that I want to highlight, I mean, there's like, I can spend a really long time with this and really get into the nitty gritty, anatomy and physiology of the tarantula. But I thought the way that I would attack this is that I've seen a lot of tarantula videos with feeding and, people explaining things with tarantulas. And one of the things that I want to highlight, or the way I want to approach this is that I want to highlight the anatomy of the tarantula that you're going to most likely see in, let's say, like a feeding video, or perhaps, I know when I was starting out with tarantulas, there was parts of the tarantula anatomy that I was like, what's that about? You see a tarantula eating, and you're wondering how the fangs work, or what these guys are right here, right? Because we know that tarantulas have 8 legs, and we're missing a leg actually. Here we go. So here's our 8th leg. Okay, so we know that they have 8 legs, but then you have these two appendages here and these two appendages here. And I remember I used to wonder, were these considered, well, they couldn't be, but what are they exactly? And so that's kind of the things that I want to discuss, is hopefully highlight some of the things that you're going to see most likely in some other video that you may watch, or one of my videos that you may watch when I feed the tarantulas, or what have you. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you see here, the tarantula is laid out, and we're going to look at the dorsal aspect of the tarantula first. The dorsal meaning, think dorsal fin, like with a shark or a dolphin. We're going to be looking at the backside, okay, the dorsal aspect. And we're going to start from the most anterior aspect of the tarantula and work our way down, work our way back to the posterior end, okay? So we're looking at it from the most anterior part. The first part that you're going to come across, as you can see here, are the fangs. Can you see that? Don't know how the lighting is. So here are the fangs. And so as I detach the fang, and this is actually 2 parts. You have the fang, right? You have the fang right here. This is the part that will penetrate the prey, and it will inject its venom. This is a venom gland. So the venom gland will contain the enzymes, the protein enzymes that will be injected into the food, and will pre-digest the food before it actually ingests it. Okay, so this is kind of like this is a mouth part. This is called a chelicerae. Okay, so this is a chelicerae with the venom gland and the fang. The fang being a hollow point where the venom will be injected. All right, and so as I'm working my way again posteriorly, we're going to get to the next thing that you're going to see. And what spiders are very famous for is having their eyes, 8 eyes. So tarantulas have 8 eyes. You have 2 rows. You have 4 in the anterior and 4 in the posterior. So these 2 are the anterior mid, okay, the middle anterior, and then these are the lateral anterior, the lateral posterior, and the mid posterior. So not all of these eyes are equal, actually, in the sense that they all have the same. Give them the same quality of vision. These 2 anterior, the middle 2 anterior, are the ones that are going to give it the best clear picture. The rest of these, they still can't see, but for the most part, they don't have as clear a vision on the lateral aspect of the tarantula. So these 8 eyes allow it to have a much wider field of view, for potential prey or for potential predators even. In fact, they're pretty sensitive. Anything creating a shadow above them, they're pretty sensitive. And I know from mine, anytime that for the most part anyways, especially the ones that are a little bit more jittery, they can kind of sense me coming from the top. I think it's because of the shadow that I cast, and their eyes catch that, and they just bolt to their burrow, or under some rock that I have set up. So again, you have 8 eyes, and you have optical nerves going into the brain, essentially. So this is the central nervous system of the tarantula. And you see that there's little groups here, these are ganglions. Much like the human spine, as the spine kind of shoots out, you have ganglions, and then dorsal roots, and then they kind of go out into the periphery. Okay, and you'll see here that you have these nerve fibers that are shooting out to every single one of the extremities. Okay, so my tarantula is falling apart here. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time putting it together, but as you can see here on some of the legs here, you have a nerve fiber that's shooting down. Okay, and this part of the central nervous system, the brain, basically orchestrates how the tarantula moves. And when you stop to think about that, it's actually really cool how it orchestrates all this to get to a certain point or to achieve a certain act. Because for a human, we're only having to manage 4 limbs, right? And then of course we have our fingers too. But for the tarantula, you can see that it has a nerve fiber going out, extending to each one of the legs, which can move independent of each other. Okay, so you have unilateral movement, not necessarily bilateral movement like us. If I move my right hand up, my left hand doesn't have to move up either. It can be controlled independently. So that's the nervous system. Okay, and just above the nervous system, and actually something that and I can go ahead and talk about it now. On the ventral side, on the back side, you have the mouth parts. So you have the labium here. And so, like I mentioned before, the tarantula will inject the venom with the fangs, and that venom will pre-digest it. The tarantulas can sit there and eat for hours. Okay, they will take almost, I've left worms in the tarantula, and where they live, and I see them attack it, and the next morning they'll still be digesting it. So they can take quite a bit doing that. And so as they're digesting it, as they're pre-digesting it on the outside, they have something of a sucking stomach. Their mouth here kind of, they have mandibles and such on the ventral side that help put in the food here. And so on that ventral side, or in the cephalothorax, just above the central nervous system, okay, you're going to have what's called a sucking stomach. In fact, that's the red part. That's the red one here. This is the sucking stomach. So it's like a straw. It essentially slurps up the pre-digested food that it's holding. Okay, it slurps it up, and then these are this is the arterial system, and this is the stomach. Okay, so as you can see, it digested, and those this will lead back into the abdomen, and we'll get to that in a second. And this is the arterial system. And just like the nervous system, you'll notice that the digestive system and the arterial system all have branches that will lead out to their individual appendages on the outside. So just real quickly, going back to the anterior part. So here's a cephalothorax, right? This is the carapace. Now the carapace, real quick, another note on the carapace. Depending on the genetics of the tarantula, this and the abdomen, of course, is where you're going to see a lot of the genetic diversity on the outside. You're going to see the different colorations, and the carapace can be a variety of colors, and it's pretty neat. That's one of the things that's so cool about the tarantula hobby, is that there are so many, just like any other animal, really. I mean, the diversity of nature is amazing, and with tarantulas, there's over 1,000 different types of species and different coloration patterns that you'll get, and it's kind of fun trying to get as many as you can. So again, going back to the anterior, we have these guys. I didn't mention anything about these just yet. And like I said, this can take quite a while. These are called pedipalps. Okay, these are not considered legs. These are pedipalps. Okay, so these pedipalps do a couple of things. Especially depending on whether you're male or female. So these pedipalps, I've noted many times that when I'm feeding the tarantulas, these help in keeping the prey kind of they help position the prey where the tarantula wants it as it's eating it. Now for males, on the pedipalps, on the ends of the pedipalps, they'll develop some. These are sex organs for the males too, because what they'll do is that they'll create a web. They'll create a web with their spinnerets, the most posterior part of the tarantula. They'll create a web, what's called a sperm web, and what they'll do is they'll lay their sperm on that web, and then with their pedipalps, these things, if they're now this particular tarantula is a female, okay. One reason you know that is because they look like boxing gloves, is what they call them, or what they say. So they swell up like boxing gloves, and what they do is they pick up the sperm with these pedipalps, and then they can go find a female. And then they inject this sperm on the female and the female reproductive organs. So there's a little flap on the inside of the tarantula, of a female tarantula, right over here, where they can insert the sperm into the female tarantula, and the female tarantula will, do her thing and create babies. So Now, another thing that they do that's really fascinating, and you can catch this on a number, on a lot of the mating videos that you can see in tarantula videos on YouTube, is that they do this really cool palpations. So what they'll do is they'll drum on the web of the female's enclosure. They'll drum on it, and those vibrations the female will sense, and then she will drum back. So they basically court each other with their drumming of the pedipalps. It's really cool, and that's kind of how they know that hey, I'm here and I'm ready. Now males, males typically after they're sexually mature, they can live for another year or two, depending on the species, and so this apparently the formation of sperm and all the stuff that they do as they're sexually mature, and once they start mating, some tarantulas will die soon after on their own, or they'll get eaten by the female, or they'll just keep going, and they can inseminate up to 5 females with the amount of sperm that they collect on their bulbs or their pedipalps, and then they'll die soon after that. Females, on the other hand, they can live up to 20-30 years, again depending on the species. So again, the tarantula, so we're moving more posterior. On the lateral aspect, you have your 8 legs, okay, as we mentioned before. And each of these legs is really interesting, especially on the male. Actually, one other thing to differentiate a female and the male, on the tibia of the male, they'll develop what's called a hook, a tibial hook, okay, or a spur. And that spur, so what the male tarantula will do is he'll use its front 2 legs, and he'll hold up the female, so the female will be kind of positioned like that. And once it's positioned like that, then they can inseminate the female. But they'll do that with the hooks, the tibial hooks that they have on their front legs, and they'll just kind of hook the female up and keep her prostrated up, so the male tarantula can do its thing. So 2 things that will differentiate a female and a male, again, are the bulbs, the gloves on the pedipalps, and the tibial hooks. Other than that, there's not too much more that externally that you can tell. Other than that, with some tarantulas, male tarantulas, males tend to be a little bit longer, more leggy, and not as thick and full as a female. Another thing real quick, so on the legs, before we move on to the abdomen, one of the cool things about this, like when I first got into the hobby, I remember when I first went into, or one of the first times I went into a pet shop, I noticed, and it was actually a Brachypelma hamori too, or it could have been a smithy for all I know. I noticed that it was crawling on it had the ability to walk on glass, and one of the first things that came to my mind as a biologist, because I didn't know a ton about tarantulas at the time, but I knew about other things, other reptiles. I knew about van der Waals interactions with like geckos, and how they're able to walk on glass with the anatomical reactions that the tiny hairs on their feet have with the glass, the atoms of the glass, and how those interactions actually help keep the animal attached to a very smooth surface. And so I was wondering if tarantulas had that same ability, and apparently they do. Apparently tarantulas have tiny little microscopic hairs on their legs that create van der Waals reactions that are able to help it to walk on glass. But in addition to that, is that they also have little hooks on their they have little claws, little hooks on their legs. And these little claws, I noticed this because one tarantula was upside down, hanging on the mesh of the enclosure. So it crawled up the glass, and then it hung upside down on the enclosure. And I noticed that the hook got stuck on the mesh, and it was actually, the tarantula was hanging on one leg. And I noticed the hook that it was stuck there, and I just kind of gently with my finger just kind of nudged it off, and it fell down. But yeah, that's kind of one of the dangers about little fine mesh, is that the tarantulas, when they get really curious, they can walk up and get stuck on the mesh. All right, so continuing on with tarantula anatomy, I'm looking now at the posterior end of the tarantula, and this is the abdomen. Okay, this is the abdomen. And so the abdomen has some pretty important it plays a very important role. And as I mentioned before, with the cephalothorax, okay, with the carapace, that depending on the genetic variety that you have, you can have a really different color, a different pattern on the abdomen that will really make your tarantula distinct from others. And on top of the legs too, the coloration of the legs will differ as well, making these animals very beautiful and fun to have. So moving on. So like I said, this is a female tarantula, right? So I mentioned before on the ventral side, on the genitalia for the female, this is where the sperm would go, and this is an opening for book lungs. This is where it would breathe. Oh, and actually, I'll get back to the ventral in a minute. So actually, no, let me go ahead and do it. So here's the ventral. We have this. There's not a lot to say about the ventral part. So we have the sternum here. Okay, this is a point of attachment for muscles on the inside. Okay, and again, the female genitalia, and then your openings for the book lungs where it breathes, and then your spinnerets. Okay. So back to the abdomen over here. So if this is a female, this is what we have here, our ovaries. Okay, so the sperm will go into the ovaries, and of course, as you know, the genes will mix, and then the female will make what's called a cocoon or a specialized web to house her eggs. Okay, and a tarantula can have anywhere from 100 to 500 hatchlings, tiny little slings. Okay, and these slings, they can be super tiny, and they some of them can grow pretty fast, and some of them slow, depending on temperatures and feeding schedules and whatnot. Now, so just real quick on the life cycle of a tarantula. So a tarantula does not have a determinate amount of molts. Molts being how many times a tarantula will get out of its exoskeleton, take it off like a jacket. There isn't an indeterminate amount like a scorpion, let's say. Scorpions have specific amounts of molts. Tarantulas do not. They can vary. And so there's not, so as far as like what determines, like how do you know you have a sling or a young adult or a male? Like for example, a mature male, you'll start to see the boxing gloves form and the tibial hooks. And also, so for like going from a mature male, and then you'll know that's a sexually mature male, then you can start mating it. Going a little bit backwards, a young adult would be the different, like a sling. Most slings all look the same. They're all kind of like tiny little brown snakes. And a young adult, you could say, would be considered a sling that is beginning to show its adult colors. At that point, actually that would be more like a juvenile. And as the colors become more distinct, then it's kind of going into young adult phase, and then full mature with full coloration. So it's not an exact science as far as differentiating life cycles per se. So these were the ovaries, right? Oh, actually, one thing I didn't mention. So here you have the silk glands. Okay, so this is what produces the silk, and the tarantulas will web up their enclosures pretty well. Some of them are prolific webbers, and some of them not so much. Some of them you won't even be able to tell, but they've webbed the covering of their enclosure, and you don't tell until you actually try picking something up, and then you'll notice that you like a bunch of the substrate will come out with it. Okay, so in any case, okay, so after that you have the intestines. Okay, so the sucking stomach sucks the all the food, all the nutrients, and into the digestive system. And this is the intestinal system. This is the digestive glands. So all the enzymes that help break up the food even more into molecules that will go into the bloodstream. And then we have here, finally, we have the breathing system. Okay, you have the heart, the circulatory system. Okay, so this is the heart. And sometimes you can see the heart in the abdomen. Like if the abdomen is really inflamed, like let's say you had a massive, this intestine is just swollen, the abdomen or the heart will kind of protrude. You can see the coloration on the abdomen on some of the snakes, spiders. And then attached to the heart, you'll have what's called the book lungs. Okay, this is the respiratory system of the tarantula, and most book lungs for the tarantulas are attached to the heart. Okay. In fact, that's one of the things that when you have a molt and you take a look at your molt, you should be able to see the book lungs as well. Okay, well, this was pretty lengthy. I didn't think it would be that long, but this, for the most part, this is not an exhaustive look at the anatomy of a tarantula, but this is a basic look at it. So when if you know these terms and you're kind of looking at a video where they're feeding them or what have you, you can have a general idea as to what's going on with the tarantula and its anatomy. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching. Appreciate your time, and good luck in your studying.